Hello, if you're watching, it's just a few minutes before 7 and we'll be starting promptly at 7 o'clock with our live on air for tonight, which is on Why Tertiary Chaplaincy Matters. But just a little bit of prior advertising before we begin. We've opened the first ever micro MOOC for the Methodist Church of New Zealand. It's called 4 Key Questions of Practical Theology, and this page is totally open to anyone and everyone. I think we've got a participant from the British Methodist Conference in it. I'm not 100% sure on that yet. What you can see if you go to, all you need to do is type in 6 senses, 4 key questions, Google something like that and ask for the micro MOOC, and it should bring you to this particular page. Everything that you want is on the one page, and what it consists of are the instructions for the MOOC, which are sitting there. It takes you, there's a link to the live on-air Sunday broadcast, which is in a fortnight's time, and in the slideshow, you just click through each slide and you've got a short video to watch. There are 5 videos. They last a total of about 22 minutes. You watch the video number 1 and then you go to forum number 1.
But not so much about religion.
If I could just make a point, David. In Auckland, we have a very strong sense of secularity about our place in the world, and increasingly, as I've seen it, the Palangi Christian perspective is becoming less and less engaging with the university, because the university chooses not to have that there. But the tangata whenua, the treaty implications of karakia, is becoming the norm. And this is where I think the relationship matter is really important in terms of the personality or the person of the chaplain is so critical, that we don't bring an institutional church view to our role. We bring a personal mana, which comes with the credibility that one is able to build in relation to the university, and that is a critical element of that relationship building, which without, I think, will leave chaplain irrelevant to the rest of the university. So that in our case, there was a student that committed suicide, which was very tragic, from our new business school, jumped off the 6th floor and died instantly. And normally the Māori office would be called to come and do the karakia and blessing, except in this case, the Vice-Chancellor rang me personally to come and do the blessing and lead that part. That, I think, is about the personal relationships that we build in the context of the university with the leadership of the university, and that's an important part, I think, of that relationship building. We don't come in here with a church authority in the right to be part of a secular system.
Which is why it's very important that we stay a good number of years to build up that credibility. And certainly we've had a number of suicides over the years, and that has meant a big part of my ministry in recent years has been devoted to suicide prevention and supporting the mother of a student who died 2 years ago to set up a trust. We call it Life Matters Suicide Prevention Trust. And just a few weeks ago we filled the Anglican Cathedral in Dunedin with people who are very concerned about suicide prevention, and invited mental health experts to speak, but also people who had experienced bereavements from losing loved ones to suicide. So chaplains and tertiary institutions are well placed to support suicide prevention out of our own experience of the horror of dealing with families, sadly, who've lost loved ones to suicide on campus. And there are increasing mental health issues for students with the stresses they're coming through with today compared with 20 years ago. So there's a lot more mental illness, there's a lot more depression, a lot more stress, given the state of the world today compared with how it was when I was at university.
Right. I think for our viewers, we've fixed that feedback issue, which
Well
is
done.
fantastic. Yeah, well, it only took me half an hour, so it may well be that the first half an hour of the broadcast is not very good quality. So the three of us might just have to come back in and do it privately and then share it. But
Okay.
if you are asking, if anyone in the audience, there are at least 7 viewers in here at present, and it's a very good idea if you can find how to toggle on the live Q&A. I think you're looking for a little matrix of 9 buttons. If you push your mouse sort of to the top of the presenting screen, you should be able to toggle on the live Q&A to be able to ask questions. Now, one part of this video that I broadcast that I really do want to put to you guys, you just started to allude to it, Greg. There have been changes in chaplaincy, and some of them have actually been huge changes. And this is not anyone's fault, but the churches are really unaware of these huge changes simply by virtue of the fact that churches tend to not be good at communication or slow at communication. Things happen at a glacial pace in the church compared to other institutions and corporations and businesses. But you both have seen big changes occur during your time as chaplains, and I wonder if you could perhaps pick that up and say, what are some of the changes, biggest change, and what have been some of the highlights associated with that change?
Well, I guess the biggest change for me relates to interfaith awareness. And during my first year at Otago back in 2000, I suddenly realized that I was there for everybody. And I came to know a number of the leaders of all the different religious groups on campus, including the Muslim leaders. And then, of course, the next year with 9/11 created this huge furore of concern about Islamic terrorism. And the first people who came to see me were the Muslim leaders who were very concerned about the backlash. And so we formed an Abrahamic interfaith group in Dunedin, which has been meeting monthly ever since. And we have an annual peace lecture, we organise visits to schools, and we've been intentional over the last 13 years about bringing students of different faiths together for interfaith dialogue and for building relationships. And so that was something I did not envisage at all when I began as a chaplain. But it culminated last year in hosting a national interfaith forum here in Dunedin, using our new Dunedin Interfaith Council, which now contains representatives from 12 different religions. So the university is very supportive of interfaith, as it is seen to be responding to the reality of the context. And just earlier this year we opened a new multi-faith prayer room on campus, and that was seen to be a priority by the university. So these are significant changes to ensure that students of all faiths have a sense of being supported spiritually by the chaplaincy team and by the institution. Internationally, we have a multi-faith association called the International Association of Chaplains in Higher Education. And both Uesifili and I were at the last conference at Yale in the United States, and that was a great experience to hear Muslim and Jewish and Buddhist and Christian speakers, all of whom are involved in chaplaincy around the world. So chaplaincy is no longer constrained within the confines of the Christian faith, and it is being applied by people of many different faiths now using the Christian model of pastoral care. So, Uesifili.
Yeah. One of the things that I know, reflecting back as a student in my day and then coming into the role here and watching my own sons go through university, is the extent to which the awareness of the students of today far exceeds what I was aware of as a young student when I came in the 1980s. And but that awareness doesn't necessarily mean that the students are any more engaged with the issues such as interfaith or civic engagement or just the social justice issues. So to me, I felt that I was more aware of those social issues in the 1980s. Things like the anti-Springbok tours were part and parcel of the life of the campus. Today, it doesn't seem to be such a big issue in terms of the lives of the students. So what we have noticed is that our approach to Christianity has been about that very personal experience, which I think has confined our chaplaincy to discussions between the chaplain and like-minded students who want to do something about their personal faith. But I think what has changed and has to change has been the need for universities to be the catalyst for social change. And nothing better than, I think, than having the Christian faith at the heart of those changes and being the catalyst for change in the culture of the university. That, I think, is the biggest change that I've seen, is that the university has become so insular in terms of the concerns of the students. And the students have been molded into this, you're only about yourself, because the university is only concerned about getting students to come in, pay their fees, do the program, and roll them out again. So it's becoming quite small, despite the expensive knowledge and technology that makes these students and the university part of this global village. What we've tried to change here has been a more social engagement, getting people from the community and the students involved in some of the things that we have been doing, interfaith, which Greg has mentioned. Things about the marginalisation of Pacific communities, for example. In Auckland, we have been quite active in that. The marginalisation of the gay and lesbian, transgender communities, we've tried to engage that part of our community here. I think these are part of this change that we think is happening, except our Christian and perhaps our chaplaincy hasn't taken on board so much. So we tended to try and expand that a little bit. But as Greg has said, the university is recognising the place of interfaith. But I have a feeling that's a more sinister motivation than simply being concerned about the place of other faiths. It's more about making sure more students from fee-paying countries can come to the university and actually pay the fees, so that things like interfaith becomes a means to an end, rather than respect and honouring the differences that exist.
Well, that's a very interesting perspective, and Barbara Moller has posed a question that's very much related to the answer you were just giving, Uesifili, so I've highlighted it. She says, you've both a very difficult job in dealing with tragic situations. How are you accepted by people with no religious beliefs to be helpful in these situations? Also, is it helpful to them?
Yes, I've had a lot of experience of offering pastoral care to people with no religious beliefs. Over the years, there have been many situations where we've had large funerals, large memorial services, where all the friends of the student who has died will come. And they're not, those gatherings are sometimes in a church, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're in a lecture theatre or in the University Union Hall. So we have a very diverse group of people, and I'm just thinking of a situation 2 years ago where a young man died by suicide, and his friends were not religious at all, but they wanted something done in their flat, and that something which we did was a blessing. And we turned up expecting only the flatmates to be there, but there were 70 others who'd come as well to support the flatmates. And most of them were not religious anyway, but they were wanting something, some ceremony, some ritual to assist them with their grief. And after blessing the room where the student had died, Father Mark, the Catholic chaplain, asked, well, who would like to be anointed? And 50 of them lined up, and we anointed them all on their hands with the sign of the cross with oil. And I know that a lot of them had very little to do with the church, but they were appreciative of that sort of ritual being offered. And then over the weeks and months following on, as we get to know some of them even better, we're in touch with those who have no religious or no church contact just as much as those who do. There seems to be a receptivity to someone who's there, who's non-judgmental, someone who can listen, someone who's showing compassion. And we're not there with an evangelical doctrine or agenda. We're not there to impose any belief. We're there to show care and compassion. And I'm still in touch with many parents around the country who are not Christian or religious in any way, but who are deeply appreciative of the role of chaplaincy. So I think we're meeting a need that the church actually could not meet or does not meet.
Well, that's a really interesting perspective, Greg, because the church isn't apparently meeting those kinds of needs in the way that it used to. At the same time, you've got the university as a secular institution kind of squeezing chaplains, saying, you know, okay, well, there's a kind of a tolerance, but it's different for chaplains, for example, who work in hospitals. Virtually every hospital chaplaincy, the work of the chaplains and the necessity for some kind of, whether they're Muslim chaplains, Christian chaplains, is really irrelevant. Their work is much more clearly seen as beneficial compared to the universities.
Yeah, the church is, I'd like to rephrase what I said earlier, I guess the church is meeting the need through the appointment of chaplains beyond the walls of the church. What I meant earlier was a lot of these people would never be in a church or would never meet a minister of the church, whereas they do meet a chaplain. And at university they get an email twice a year from the chaplains, and they all seem to know that we're here. So, yeah.
So you do see a use of the chaplaincy on behalf of the churches?
Yes, well, the chaplains at Otago are the church on campus in a sense, but not in terms of ministering to a congregation. It's like John Wesley's attitude of the world is my parish. The world is my parish as well, because we have over 90 different countries represented on our campus. And yeah, 85% of international students have a religious faith. And so we have a big ministry to internationals as well as secular Kiwis.
When you attended the big international gathering, or both of you attended, did you think that perhaps it's easier in some other countries which are also secular? Do you think New Zealand is more secular than a lot of other countries, and therefore that reflects in the university situation?
What do you think, Uesifili?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether it's more or less. What I've experienced is that, you know, in the secular institution, it's a real gift, I think, that what we offer in ministry is for everybody, regardless of whether they are religious or not. And one of the gifts and the privileges that I've had in this role has been that I can participate in a gathering where I can offer and express my faith and it's not about converting people to my faith. It's about affirming a human need in a given situation, whether it's a suicide or a blessing of a space. It's about giving over my sense of meaning from a Christian perspective to a wider audience, which I think what Greg has said is not an opportunity we often get in the church, where we are captured and confined to the meetings on the Sunday or to the life of the congregation, in terms of its interest. But in the university setting, the fact that it is a secular institution, I think makes it, in my case, a very satisfying ministry, where it's not about the secularity of the institution. It's about the giftings of our faith in a setting that can allow those who don't follow our teaching the opportunity to see life and situations from a different point of view. And I find that one of the most rewarding parts of the work and the ministry here of the chaplaincy.
Sorry, Greg.
One thing we did notice at Yale in the United States, a lot of the chaplaincies are denominational. One thing we should point out for both Uesifili and I, we're ecumenical chaplains, so we are funded by a whole range of denominations, whereas in the United States they tend to have a Methodist chaplain, an Episcopalian chaplain, and a Presbyterian chaplain, all in little offices around the campus, whereas we are fortunate to be on campus, both of us, or near campus. And there's not a lot of ecumenical chaplaincies in the United States, even though they're notionally, a more, a less secular society than we are, in terms of those who would say they believe in God.
Well, again, that's a really interesting point, and we actually have reached the time when I'd close, but because we had that feedback problem originally, I'd like to keep going for another 5 or 10 minutes with your permission, and then if necessary, if I have to edit out where we had the feedback, we've still got a very workable 35 minute presentation. Is that okay with the two of you?
Yeah.
If we just go, yeah, we're wandering between 5, 6 and 7 viewers at any given time. So just picking up that point about it being an ecumenical chaplaincy, is that true for the Maclaurin Chapel, Uesifili?
Well, it is officially the ecumenical chaplaincy that I fill, but it's a very difficult one to actually put into practice in terms of the relationship to the ecumenical partners. So whilst I might be exercising an ecumenical chaplaincy here on campus, the reality is that it's very hard to bring together a kind of support and a real partnership between the chaplaincy and the so-called ecumenical partners. And we haven't quite worked out why that is. But I think generally there is a disconnect between the ecumenical partners or denominations and those who serve in university chaplaincy. And my sense is that it's because it's kind of outside of the interests of the day-to-day thrust of denominational church life, that the building of these partnerships between the ecumenical chaplain and the ecumenical partners are not so easy to put into practice. So we struggle a little bit with that, unless we are very intentional about going to a Methodist synod or attending a Presbyterian presbytery. We've never been to an Anglican setup or a synod, but unless we are very intentional about that, we don't seem to have a pathway into the life of our partner churches or our ecumenical partners. So it's a difficult
Does
one.
that reflect the state of ecumenism anyway in New Zealand? For a couple of decades, the original negotiating churches have really not done anything further in terms of furthering ecumenical partnership. In fact, there have been quite a few dissolutions of ecumenical ventures over the years. So it may be that chaplaincy isn't the only party that's sort of a little bit disadvantaged in the current mood. Do you think that for the church's sake, it's important that you keep going as ecumenical chaplains? Do you feel supported? You're both in the Methodist Church. Do you feel supported by the Methodist Church into your ecumenical role?
So one thing to note is that both our chaplaincies were established 50 years ago, when ecumenism was stronger. And I think Otago is slightly different to Auckland in that we do have an ecumenical board representing different denominations, and we have significant financial support from the Presbyterian Church, the Presbyterian Synod in particular. And in Christchurch, it's the Anglican Synod that is very supportive financially of ecumenical chaplaincy. And so the degree of ecumenical health, if you want to call it that, will vary depending on the university and the history of each place. But one good thing that the Methodist Church has initiated in the last couple of years through mission resourcing is to bring together chaplains from around the Methodist Church once a year. And so I've enjoyed, I think now three years where Trevor Hoggard has brought those who can attend together, from hospital chaplains, tertiary chaplains, military chaplains, prison chaplains, for a day of training and of sharing and of learning from each other. So that's one good sign of something that has happened in recent years. We do get the opportunity to report to the Methodist Conference each year, and there's generally not a lot of discussion about the report. The report is received and we would hope valued. On occasions I've got up at conference and asked people at conference to put up their hands if they have a young person, or if they know someone in their family who's coming to university next year. And normally it's at least half the conference will put up their hand. And so at times like that, we have tried to engage with the Methodist Church at all levels. But as Uesifili says, it's not part of the core business of any denomination. And people like Uesifili and I are very much in the minority in terms of the number of presbyters in our church, for example. So it is a specialist ministry, and it would take...
Would you recommend anyone else follow in your footsteps when you eventually leave the role, Greg?
I would, yes. I think it is a calling from God to serve in this context. For me, it has been 16 years, which is a lot longer than I envisaged. But the longer I stay, the more I find that I have the opportunity to touch lives in a way that I couldn't touch had I stayed in parish ministry. I have access to a far broader range of people, and young people whom I can support and encourage and mentor and model the way of Christ in a way that I find very fulfilling. So I would recommend it here for others.
Yeah, I found the ministry here probably the most satisfying ministry for me. And I've been in 3 parishes or so and been in ministry a wee while. I found not just the chaplaincy as a challenging place, because you are amongst people who, you know, are professionals, people at the top of their professional lives who don't leave their brains at the door. They bring it to work, and they engage in that kind of intellectual rigor and awareness which we would be challenged to find in most of our congregations. So for me, it's been at the cutting edge of that thinking, of research, of inquiry, and I have found it quite a humbling experience to be part of this learning community. To me, I think it should be compulsory for ministry or ministers to have at least spent some time in chaplaincy, because it gives you a much broader perspective on what actually goes on in the world, and you're better for it in terms of your parish ministries, but also in terms of how you contribute to the wider life of your denomination at a national level. It's really ministry at the cutting edge of young people's learning, which is the future of our country. And so for me, you know, I couldn't have found a more inspiring, challenging and fulfilling ministry to be part of than the chaplaincy.
Yes, I had a meeting with a student just recently, and the student was asking me, what is pastoral care? And she had told me that she had always stayed away from chaplaincy because she thought pastoral care was something religious. But through a suicide prevention service that she attended, which I led, she has come to value chaplaincy, actually. And now she's one of my chief consultants in terms of rewriting our RAC card. We're reconsidering some of the wording in light of her willingness to assist us with that. And so it's breaking down stereotypes of what a minister or a clergy person is in the eyes of someone who's had nothing at all to do with the church. And in that sense, we are able to share the way of Christ with people who otherwise would not see that being modelled. And they're able to ask us questions about that.
Okay, well, I'm going to say we've probably reached the end of our discussion, and thank you both very much for being part of it. Sorry, it seems as if the echo has come back, so that probably indicates to me that there's something happening in Google YouTube that was beyond my technical control.
Okay.
What I'd like to say is that we'll do our best to edit this video to get the best out of it, but if not, people will be able to get, Greg and Uesifili and I will just meet in a private hangout and re-record, so nothing will be lost and Barbara's question will also be preserved. So thank you both very much and have a very good evening.
You too.
Thank you, David.